All right, recording's a go.
Okay. I have a question in lab. Where is it? The files. Okay. Question 2. After the task explanation, if in your main you will call the method twice with argument 1 and 10. I didn't get it. 1 and 10.
Okay. So what I understood here is so if you have a method, so this is just static, or actually just void test method, and it takes a double user radius, for example, and it just does something. In theory, this should work. Hopefully this works. When we call it from I think Mona or Amina and Ryan are just dialing in. Yeah. When we say we call, we're calling the method with specific arguments. That just means, so this is when we're like, this is how we call a method, right? We just type it in. If we want to call it with specific arguments, then we put, test method 1 and 10, right? So now we're calling it with the arguments 1, and we're calling it with the arguments 10.
Oh, the data. Data.
Sorry, which what are we like? Which question?
Mona just had a question on what prof
question
meant.
2, yeah. Question 2 about the lab. It says that in your main you will call the method twice with argument 1 and 10. I can understand what means argument 1 and 10.
Argument 10 means like you keep the radius for 1 and 10 and you display the area for both, right?
That was my understanding, where you just kind of,
So just like you write like the method, which is display area of circle, then in brackets 1 under your main.
I don't.
So when we do it once, so this is how you call a method, right? You type the method that you've written in, and then you pass arguments to it within the brackets, right? So what this is saying is basically,
oh yes, we should insert the data 1 by 1 and 1 by 10.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's just asking you to calculate the area of a circle with radius 1 and then with radius 10.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know why this isn't working. I've done something wrong here, but I don't know what it is.
It's okay. I got it. Thank you.
Coding on the fly is difficult.
I think it's is it saying the non-static field for your first static void main if you put the args in that top thing, maybe? Does it matter?
No, that shouldn't be required. I don't know if I need static here.
Oh yeah, it's saying 11 there. Yeah, it went away.
So maybe that'll do it. And this should just print ASDF. Yeah. So I just needed the static down here.
This was the first week I realized from watching the YouTube video that you don't need using system at the top. You can just open like a class for a static void and it'll still run.
It depends on your compiler.
Yeah.
So
It's
Visual Studio 2022
eh?
lets you, you don't even need to declare a class. You can just run straight. It removes the overhead requirement. But I think it's a good habit to keep doing that.
Practice doing it. I just didn't realize like if I didn't put it in for certain things, it would even run,
Yeah. So I guess while we're on the topic of the lab, any other questions with the lab? I think we covered most of this. I think within the lecture itself. I know Mona, you didn't get a chance. You weren't able to attend the latter half.
Yeah. I
but
always have class.
yeah, that's rough.
If you even watch the video part after.
Yes,
even in
I
the-
always watched it. Yeah,
Oh,
I always watch it. Yeah.
Because I was gonna say that question, I think it was Kid who even put it in the chat. He
Mhm.
had put like the answer to this
Yeah.
one in the chat, and then Riza was like, "Don't do that."
But yeah, I think one thing to be very careful of is now that we're working with return values, we need to be a little bit more careful with the phrasing of the question. And it's something that comes up in the assignment as well, right? Where sometimes he'll be asking for a return value, and then sometimes he'll be asking for no return value, right? And the difference, so like, for example, this doesn't have a return value, right? So I cannot assign a variable var double equals, like this just won't work, right? Because it's not returning anything. So when it tries to run test method 1 and stick it into double test, it just won't, there'll be nothing. You can see here, it cannot implicitly convert type void to double because the method itself is returning a void. But what you can do in the, like, what I'm trying to get at is, even though the console output might be the same, you want to be careful of what the question itself is asking. Does that make sense? Sorry, it was kind of a roundabout way of explaining it.
I think I get what you mean. You just have to, like you're saying, he's going to reference certain things where it's like to the user at the end, you want to make sure that the return that they're seeing is what you want. Or are you talking about where you call your return even?
Well, it's more, this one's a good example, right? Where if you have a return, like it's asking you to call the method and assign the return value to a variable volume, right? And then print the volume of the volume to 1 decimal point. So conceivably, you could have a method here. Let's call it method no return, and it pulls in, you know, like we'll do a square, you know, length,
Yeah.
double height or width. And this will console.write line
Ask the prompt or whatever.
Length times width. Right, so we can call this method no return with, you know, 5 and 10. And this will give you the square dimensions of 50, at least it should, right? So it gave us dimensions of 50, which arguably is what this is asking to do, right? It got the volume of a cube, or square, I guess. But if you try and assign this, but if you read deeper into this, there's an extra step, right? So first you want to call the method and assign the return value to a volume variable. But if you try and do, you know, square size equals method no return, this will fail because this method doesn't have a return, right? Whereas if you have instead a variable, that method with a return, so instead of being a void, which would return null, And then it would be return length by width. And then console.writeLine square size. So these two approaches will print the same into your console. Oh no, it's not. What am I missing here? No. These two will return the same value. You can see they both spat out 50, but the innards of how it got to 50 are quite different, right? One is a return value that gets assigned to a variable that then gets, and then you print out the variable, whereas the other prints out the result as a part of the method. So just one thing to be very careful of as we get deeper into this, that we want to be very cognizant of what exactly they're asking for. Because I think that'll start coming into play as we dive into things. Does that make sense? Does that example, clarify what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
Sweet. So we can dive into the assignment. I was talking to Mona earlier, and when I looked at this, I actually felt this should be, hopefully relatively straightforward for most of us. Because I think a lot of this stuff we've already seen in the past, right? Creating a menu. Sorry?
It's just using the methods. It's like using methods instead of previous techniques we would have, right?
Exactly, right? But the logic remains the same, right? Like displaying a menu, that's something we've done before. It's a bunch of write lines. Choosing from the menu, again, that's something that we've done before as well. Or sorry, making it repeat is something that we've done before. Trying to calculate the sum of a series of numbers, again, that's something that we looked at when we were doing the while loops, and makes it a little bit more complex of how exactly we calculate the sum. Sum of cubes, average.
Can I ask you one question to what you were talking about before, just to clarify?
Mm-hmm.
So with the code you have up on the screen, kind of with what you're saying is if you allocate void and you have a write line or something associated in there, you're not going to get a return. Whereas if you allocate variable designation instead of void of what you want and then write return, it's like you say, it's giving a different output, but that's the point of what you're saying is the difference. Like you've allocated the variable with that method as opposed to above, it's left as void and then written out as a write line kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because you'll see that some of these, like this one, has no return value, right? So this, when you call this method, you don't want to be assigning it to a variable and then printing out the variable.
It would fall under like a void method kind of thing.
Exactly. And then the other thing to keep in mind here is the arguments that they're asking for, right? This gets a little bit confusing, and it only kind of comes apparent when you dive into it. But for example, this one, actually I had someone else message me on this, an int representing the number of input that will constitute the sum. That's a lot of words. It's a little bit confusing. But essentially what this is saying is, I want to feed this method a number, any number. After the method receives that number, it will prompt me for additional numbers and add them up until I've reached the first number. So if I give the method 5, then the method will keep asking me for more numbers until I've given it 5 numbers, and then it'll return the sum of all of the numbers. So that, the wording here can be a little bit confusing, but that's how I ended up interpreting it and approaching it. Particularly, you know,
confusing to gather that from what it is written as, but it makes sense when you say it. But yeah, I wouldn't get that from reading it.
yeah. And the key thing here is the display here as well, right? Where it says display only the prompt for the user inputs, but not display the sum. So that's you know, that likens back to this concept that we're talking about here, right? Where you want to be asking for the user inputs, so the additional numbers, but you don't want to be writing the sum. You only write the sum later when you call the main, assign it to a variable, and then you display the resulting value. So that's really why I wanted to make clear this distinction of a return value versus not a return value, even though it spits out the same number at the end. The sort of under the hood aspect is quite different.
So would that be, sorry to interrupt,
No, go ahead.
for a question like that, that'd be an example where you just have multiple blocks, like a void block and then a variable block, or does it necessarily require that?
This would just be a single method.
But just your return would call only the one thing within
Sorry,
that.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So just like on your code right now, how you have like static double and it's just inside those blocks.
Mhm.
There you might have calculations above the return that are different from what the return is, but the return is going to define what the output is. So that's how you could do it all within one block.
Exactly. So like you might have, you know, a while loop here, you know, while blah.
Sorry, I wasn't as good as
do
explaining
math
that.
stuff, and then after you have some sort of
You call a
counter,
return from that step above.
yeah, like running or int running total equals blah that you've been, you know, adding to during your while loop, and then you would return sort of your running total as a part of sort of as your closing statement, so to speak, of this this method. But yeah, so that's my overall spiel on this stuff. I know some folks haven't had a chance to dive deeper into it. I don't know if anyone else has any questions on specific questions. I mean, hopefully I led you down the right track. I saw your message on Teams on this last one here. If not, you know, we can chat about this now as well.
I'm just looking in the questions to see what she was asking.
Oh, she messaged me directly.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I just wasn't sure if there, I think the question was, is there an easy way to auto-populate a table in C#? And to my knowledge, I don't think there is. But if we think back to one of the previous assignments where we had to do something similar with sort of the depreciation calculation and the depreciation table, that's how I approach this problem here. I mean, I'm not sure.
You, like for the quadratic equation, do you like need to say for x? So will you have to say like for x, if x is 0, then y is this, or you just display the table?
I just displayed the table. So I basically did a loop that printed out each line of this.
Okay.
And each sort of each iteration of the loop, I increased x and recalculated the various values. And then I just kept printing and printing and printing.
Okay.
just printing, or it should be
Oh, sorry.
calculated by y, by the formula, I mean, because it has a formula, but I think we should write about the formula and it calculate. I don't know.
So what I did, and I believe this is what was my interpretation is, so I would, x equals whatever, and then I would calculate, well, 5 is 5, obviously. 3x is x times 3. Negative 2x to the power of 2 is, I think we learned math POW in class, so x 2 times negative 2, et cetera, and then y would be the sum of the above. And then so after calculating all of these variables, I would print them in table format, and then I would repeat that for each of them, so that I would end up with something that looks like this in my console.
Mm-hmm.
So you had outputs in table format, but for every row.
So, and you have to like keep them for 1 decimal place for all, right?
I followed the rounding that he did.
Okay.
Yeah. And sorry, Ryan, I missed a question there.
Oh, I was just saying, so like what you did there, basically you're showing like a block for each row of the table. So you printed it in table format, but it's per row basically in the way that you wrote the code.
I mean, I only wrote it once. The rest was
Okay.
incremented, right? Because you can,
Okay.
instead of copying this 8 times realistically, since everything's driven off X, you can just count
Gotcha.
off
Okay.
X
I was
and then
just quickly
recalculate.
looking at it and I didn't notice if it actually like, I was trying to think of how it was working off the variables, like 0.5 going to.
Yeah,
or,
so
sorry, I
this
was
is
looking at
the
wrong row. Yeah.
this is the equation that you're following. So you
Okay.
just kind of increment X and you plug it into this, and it'll calculate everything for you. Is the idea that I followed.
Sorry, I was just noticing the increments aren't like consistent in X.
It's
Like-
actually, so it's 0.25.
Oh, sorry. I
But
should have read
it's,
this before. My apologies.
no, it's all good. It's all good.
And then it's rounded differently under X. I see what you mean.
It's rounded upwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So again, a lot of this relies on the stuff that we've done in the past. So like string formatting that Mona had spoken about a number of weeks back to help us round from 0.2 or to display it as 0.3 without rounding it to 0.3. The calculate averages is just, no, I think we did that during, actually, I think we did pretty much all of this,
Yeah.
like 3 through 6 in the do while assignment, in some shape or fashion. So it shouldn't be too bad. Just be really careful about the return value and the arguments that we're passing in. And feel free to message if it gets a bit confusing. This one in particular was a bit confusing. I just ignored, you will invoke this method with argument 5 and then display the resulting value. Because I think this is a legacy that wasn't deleted. The thing that you want to really pay attention is when the user enters 3, because 3 corresponds to, or actually it should be 1. It shouldn't be either of these, because calculate sum corresponds to 1 calculate sum in the menu.
How long did that take you to figure out? You're
It
like,
took-
why won't this work?
Yeah.
That's funny.
But yeah, aside from that, any other questions or thoughts? I know some folks haven't had a chance to look at this, so but hopefully sort of the overview and the quick skim through gives folks some confidence on on approach for this one.
I don't have really any specific questions because, like I say, I just kind of looked at it this morning. I was pretty rough the last couple of days. So
Yeah, I hope you feel better. That's a pretty
I'm not doing
shitty
too
hand.
bad, but it's just mainly been hard to do school. Like I haven't had a cold, but I just can't focus very well the last couple of days. I'm getting better, so it's not too bad, but
Mhm.
it has sucked.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
I think I have no question either.
Sounds good. Amina, anything from you?
No, thank you.
Sweet. And again, feel free to ping me on WhatsApp or Teams.
Okay, thank you.
I'll be around most days. My evenings are a little bit busier, but I'll be around most days, and I'm always happy to chat through any problems.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you, Jason. Thank you, guys.
Cool. Alrighty. Have a good one.
Have a good day, guys.
Have a good day, guys. Bye.